America is in a Cold War with China. Do you agree or disagree? Well, tune in because that's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt, and I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. And before I get into the Cold War that we have going on with China, and whether you agree or disagree with that characterization, I want to quickly mention that you can get Bold and Blunt at WashingtonTimes.com. You can subscribe to Bold and Blunt there by going to the bottom of the WashingtonTimes.com page, finding the newsletter section, finding my newsletter, Cheryl Chumley, clicking on it, and signing up for my 3 times a week newsletter, which contains all my commentaries that I write all day long at Washington Times. The newsletter comes out Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and in addition to my commentaries, it contains my twice weekly Bold and Blunt podcasts. You can also get Bold and Blunt. Subscribe to it at edify.app. That is the online platform for faith-based podcasts. That was a mouthful there for a second. And one more quick note, you can get Bold and Blunt anywhere podcasts are offered, Spotify, Apple, and so forth. So this from AmericanForeignRelations.com, just an interesting side note. Do you even know where the phrase Cold War came from? So AmericanForeignRelations.com takes you through many historical mentions of the phrase, but one that strikes very interesting to me, and one that seems that is more commonly accepted as the creation of the phrase Cold War, is this one. In October 1945, I'm reading right now from AmericanForeignRelations.com, the English writer George Orwell of 1984 fame, Orwell of Animal Farm fame, right? George Orwell had referred to a quote-unquote Cold War in the context of what he saw as a new historical stage where a few monstrous superstates, and he puts that in quotes, would be able to divide the world between them because of their control of the awesome new weapon, the atomic bomb. Orwell surmised that these superpowers, now essentially unassailable, would agree not to use the bomb against each other, but deploy it as a means of intimidating their respective neighbors in what would constitute a permanent Cold War. So if you read Orwell, you can see how that plays out in especially 1984, the never-ending state of war where the players of the war keep changing and the citizens who learn of the war and its flip-flopping of parties, of warring parties, barely question it because it's become so commonplace. One country's warring against this country, and then the next day that country's warring against the other country, and then on the third day the first and third countries are actually warring against each other. Perpetual war, a perpetual state of war, and it serves a very political purpose to keep a perpetual state of chaos in countries where government can then justify clamping down on freedoms of citizens. So that's a different type of discussion, different day. Today is about America's fight for dominance with China. You know, under President Donald Trump, we didn't really have to worry so much about this question because it was obvious that America was still exceptional. America first, make America great again was the driving force. And Donald Trump took on China, especially China's economy, head on, and was fought by those in America who should have known better, and as a matter of fact, do know better. And yet Donald Trump still took on that fight. Joe Biden, different president entirely with family relations that are just way too uncomfortably close with China's government. Hunter Biden, can you say Hunter Biden? Well, the New York Post did. The New York Post tried before Joe Biden was brought into the White House, and they got stifled and silenced for doing that. And big tech today continues to seem to side more with communist type Chinese influences than America, because they're, in the end, citizens of the world, not citizens of America. And this all leads to a standoff between America and China that, if you look at it through truthful eyes, America's not doing so well. And what's more, the world knows it. Listen to what this one guy wrote in August of 2021 in The Guardian. That China is an economic superpower rivaling, if not surpassing, the U.S. is not a secret. That's his opener. That's his opener. Can you imagine this 20 years ago? Can you imagine before even Barack Obama, the idea? Well, I guess Bill Clinton sold out quite a bit of America's technology to China and patents and so forth. But honestly, can you imagine 20 years ago, 30 years ago, the idea of beginning a peace that it's no secret America's falling and China's rising? I can't. But that's how this piece opens. That China is an American superpower rivaling, if not surpassing, the U.S. is not a secret. Political scientists have been debating the implications of that fact for most of this century, and there's little consensus. What's clear, he goes on to say, is that China's president has been more forthright about China's global economic ambitions, meaning the Communist Party's global economic ambitions, not least with the vast and much touted Belt and Road project. They got a game plan. They got a huge, massive global game plan to take over the world's economic dominance, the world's economies, right? That's China. They have a strategy. They have a game plan, and they're actively working toward it. Now back to this piece. But China has also begun to flex its political and military muscles more openly in its extended neighborhood. And guess why? This is me, not the piece now, not Guardian, Cheryl Chumley. Guess why? In a phrase, feckless U.S. president. Under a strong American leadership, much of what we're seeing in today's world, in today's chaotic world, in today's testing of America world, much of that doesn't even happen because nefarious players around the world don't dare to show their nefarious ways. They're afraid of America. Who's afraid of America right now? Back to The Guardian. The suppression of Hong Kong Democrats, the growing campaign against Taiwan, have all caused various degrees of alarm, if little concrete response. There's the key phrase, little concrete response. And that's why you have a rapidly rising China, because there's little resistance coming from this White House, from this administration, from this president. Is there a Cold War taking place between America and China? My guest today thinks so, and he's pretty bold and blunt about stating it. His name is Congressman Mike Waltz. He's from Florida. He is a decorated military veteran. He is the first Green Beret to serve in Congress. And what's interesting is his current committee service puts him right in the sights of receiving the most pertinent, most crucial, and most timely information about America's foreign enemies, including China. He serves on the House Armed Services Committee. He is the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Readiness, which oversees Department of Defense's budget. He serves on the Subcommittee on Strategic Forces, overseeing talk of our nation's nuclear weapons, ballistic missile defense, national security space programs. And he also serves on the Subcommittee on Intelligence and Special Operations, which has jurisdiction over Department of Defense policy and programs. He serves on the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology, which is crucial to understanding the advances China is making and how that threatens America's own national security and independence. In other words, what he says is very expert on China. So Congressman Mike Waltz, thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. I really appreciate your time.
Sure. Yeah, happy to.
I wanted to talk to you today about China and where America stands in this race for global exceptionalism against China.
Yeah, no, happy to talk about it, and actually just got back from our Pacific Command, where I visited this Pacific Fleet, a Special Operations Command that's focused on the region, and also U.S. Army Pacific. So just happy to talk to you about any direction you want to go.
Well, let's just start with a generic question. How worried should Americans be right now with Joe Biden in the White House about China?
Well, I think generally speaking, and then I'll talk particularly why it's concerning with Joe Biden and his approach to foreign policy as commander-in-chief. I think generally speaking, the Chinese Communist Party, and I say that deliberately, not the amazing, wonderful Chinese people and culture, but the dictatorship that is the Chinese Communist Party is the most dangerous adversary that I think this country has ever faced. And I'm happy to walk you through that. But
yes, please.
I think the biggest reason is we've never faced an adversary, certainly not Germany or Japan or the Soviet Union, with an economy that rivals ours, and by some measures is now bigger than ours, and has embarked on a military modernization program that is making their military in some areas as good, and in some areas have actually passed ours. So I think Americans and the country needs a real wake-up call that, in my view, the Chinese Communist Party is in a Cold War with the United States. It's using all levers of power, diplomatic, informational, military, economic, to supplant the United States as a global leader. Don't take that from me. Actually read Chairman Xi, the leader of China's speeches, where he talks about replacing the American dream with the China dream. He talks about the superiority of socialism with Chinese characteristics to open and free markets. He talks about, really a timeline to put China in place as the sole global superpower, and he is aggressively, in some ways, accelerating China down that road. And the first major step will be the taking of Taiwan by any means necessary.
Can I just ask you quickly about China's economy? Because I have discussed over the last couple of years with various experts on foreign affairs the threat from China. And when they talk about China's economy, they always water it down and say China depends so much on American dollars that China doesn't have a chance to beat us economically. Could you address that?
Yeah, sure. I think that was true some years ago. But their thinking needs to change because the situation's changed, and the Chinese are doing that very deliberately. They have a plan across key technology areas to, one, become independent, and this is in robotics and pharmaceuticals and key minerals and mining. I could walk aerospace. I can really walk down the list. But the key economic technology areas to, one, become self-sufficient, but two, and this is the dangerous part, to create global dependencies on China. And they have very strategically and very aggressively walked down that road. So Americans need to wake up to the fact that we no longer produce antibiotics in this country.
Right.
They are all produced there. We no longer produce even things like rail cars, 85% now dominated in the Chinese market. Rare earth minerals and computer chips that form our modern technological economy, all dependent on China. So they have deliberately created dependencies so that one, it bolsters their economy, but two, geopolitically, in the future, and this is a very near future, in the next 5 to 10 years, if we disagree with them politically, they can cut off those key supply chains and cripple us economically. And so that's the kind of economic power that the Chinese Communist Party has embarked on. And so when my motto now is, look, when you see Made in America or Buy American, it's not just a jobs issue or a human rights issue. It's a national security issue. Hopefully, we're seeing this in polling that COVID was a bit of a wake-up call, that people saw that things are just cheap and disposable, like mask gowns and gloves. The snap of your fingers can become a real national security issue because we have such dependencies now.
How concerned are you about the environmental movement, particularly under this administration, under this Democrat Party's push for environmentalism as the top concern? Because it seems to me the farther down that road we go, the more we're handing control to China, because we're talking about the rare earth resources and so forth. Can you kind of flush that out and explain the level of concern you have?
And just as a caveat, of course, we need clean water. We need a clean environment.
Yeah.
I think that is a common bipartisan goal, but it can't be the only goal to where everything else falls a distant second, third, and fourth. And the Chinese know that with this administration in particular, and they're using this kind of obsession with climate change to gain real concessions in other places. So to your point, this drive for all electric, for air quotes, kind of environmental reasons, for emissions reasons, but what they're ignoring, what the progressives and the left are ignoring, is that you need batteries, you need battery storage for all things electric, wind turbines, cars, what have you. And in order to create those batteries, you have to mine key materials like lithium, cobalt, manganese. Number one, the Chinese have bought up those mines all over the world. It is incredibly, the way they mine is very polluting to the environment. From a human rights standpoint, they really don't give a darn about any type of labor laws or work restrictions or having a decent work environment, particularly in third world countries. So we've seen from Africa to South America to Central America where the Chinese come in and buy up these mines that then go into electric cars and wind turbines and make the key components for them. It's incredibly abusive. It's incredibly polluting. And they're essentially, turning a blind eye to all of that because of this obsession with emissions. We need to be able to do both, but we need to be able to have a balanced strategy, and we need to have a wide eye to the fact that, oh, by the way, when you do that, not only is it polluting and not only is it a labor problem, but it also is deliberately creating these dependencies. And it's in Chinese literature that they want to become the quote unquote Saudi Arabia of providing the materials you need for a green economy. And then finally, for example, solar panels, of which now 90% around the world are made in China, they make them in Western China, where literally through forced labor and through slave labor with their Uyghur population. So from a basic decency and human rights standpoint alone, we should rethink these policies.
So it's not just hyperbole to suggest that as we go green, we're basically supporting communist China.
That's right. Yep. And they've done it deliberately. And we're also ignoring slave labor and forced labor conditions as we go green, and we're ignoring the heavy, grotesque pollution that goes on. And it's even broader than that. They have massive fishing fleets that are strip mining the ocean. Literally just sucking the life out of whole swaths of ocean. It's creating real problems in places like the Philippines, off the coast of Chile. Some of these countries are pushing back, but when they try, that's where you then have a 400-ship fishing fleet, some of it armed, some of it escorted by the Chinese Navy. There's not a lot these countries can do. We're finding it with Native American populations up around Alaska, where they're doing the same things as well and strip mining the ocean. So we've seen the Chinese Communist Party have a total disregard for the environment, a total disregard for human rights, and the left just seems to ignore that for this broader climate agenda.
And you kind of segue into nicely what I wanted to raise about the right as well. Some in the Republican Party seem uncomfortably in line with this same type of I don't know, just kind of caving to China demands. I'm thinking back when Donald Trump was president and he took a hard stand against trade relations with China and economic policies, putting America first, and he was great at it. And who fought him just as much as Democrats, but some in his own Republican Party. Why is that?
Well, look, I mean, we've seen, and this is another reason that China is so dangerous, put the military competition aside. Their version and vision of victory isn't World War III. Their version is we don't have the computer chips, we don't have the steel, we don't have the raw materials to be able to even compete anymore. And part of that, and this is the most frustrating thing, is they're doing it on our money. And a big part of it is Wall Street. You've got Jamie Dimon and J.P. Morgan. You've got Larry Fink and BlackRock. You've got these titans of capitalism, so to speak, that are drunk and corrupted on Chinese dollars, and all they're focused on is the return. There is a place in the world for corporate patriotism as well. I don't know that they would have made that same. Maybe they would have, but they've taken that same approach to the Soviet Union. Where it's just all about their profit margin and all about their balance sheet. But look, at the end of the day, historians are going to look back and say the Chinese military buildup, their debt diplomacy, their strong arm tactics, they were able to do it on American money, and it is from our pension funds to academia to Wall Street to Hollywood to the NBA and sports industry. And on down the line, they are all willing to sell themselves out and turn a blind eye. They're all making money, but meanwhile, the threat continues to grow. And the real irony is, for example, the military's 401k pension fund is on the verge of investing into Beijing, where it has their defense industry on their stock exchange. So the irony to have soldiers and sailors and Marines sending their money home or sending their money into these 401k plans to save for their retirement, just to have the managers invested into Beijing, is just jaw dropping. And then finally, they're stealing their way to the top. If they can't do it through cyber, if they can't do it through sending researchers into our research centers, then they just buy it through mergers and acquisitions, which many Wall Street firms are all too happy. And these aren't, T-shirt factories. These are nanotechnology and artificial intelligence, quantum and computing. They'll buy up a lot of these startups, take their intellectual property, hand it right over to their military.
I have two other questions. Do you have time?
Sure.
So from an outsider's perspective, which I'm putting myself in that camp, it almost seems like the Joe Biden administration, the corporate powerhouses that you just described, certain people in politics have all kind of caved to the idea that America is not going to be great going forward. And so they want to hop aboard what they think is going to be the next world leader, China. Is this from an insider perspective, is this what you're getting?
Well, I think you get that in some cases. I think you get, in some cases, just a real short-sightedness. Corporate America, particularly if you're publicly traded, is just focused on the next earnings, the next quarterly, maybe your annual bonus. I actually had a very heated conversation with a major corporation that wanted to be able to sell their product into China and said, look, that's a billion-person market. And I said, look, they're going to steal your property, set up their own firm, subsidize it, and put put you out of business, and then buy up your distressed assets. They've done it from ports in the Panama Canal to key engine technologies and airlines. I mean, really across the board. It's predatory. But it's also strategic. And so I think there are some that just, I think, turn a blind eye. There are some that are only worried about, kind of their next bonus check. I think there are some in kind of along the lines of what you just said, that see themselves more, and this is particularly in big tech, more of a global citizen than American citizen.
That's a good point.
And look, at the end of the day, then they better get their social credit score in line, because Xi's vision for the world is that you will bow down to the party and to the law rules rather than the rule of law. And we just need a wake-up call. Hopefully COVID provided some of that, but I think we have a long way to go.
So last question, Congressman.
Sure.
What you outline is pretty bleak, right? And we didn't even get into the cultural seepage of Marxism in America due to China's influence and so forth. So you've described it as a Cold War. How do we win this Cold War then?
Right. Well, so a couple of things in terms of the good news is the thing the Chinese Communist Party fears the most isn't necessarily, the newest American stealth bomber, although that is a deterrent. We need to keep our military strong. But the thing they fear the most is their own people. And the advantage that we have, that we will always have, is I truly believe that our ideals, our form of government, freedom, individual responsibility, individual liberty, are by far exceptional and superior, and they're unalienable rights. That will always, I think, at the end of the day, be more appealing. The other thing that we have that China doesn't, from geopolitically, is we have friends and allies. And while we may struggle to compete as their economy eclipses ours, and then we have our own issues, spending ourselves into oblivion in our national debt, but us, alongside Japan, alongside South Korea, Australia, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, India, Europe just got a real wake-up call on ignoring and appeasing dictatorships with the Putin regime. I think that the free world combined under strong and clear-eyed American leadership can and absolutely will prevail. But gosh, we have to wake up, and it's one of the reasons that I'm on the Armed Services Committee, on the Space Committee, on Research and Technology. I think we cannot take for granted by any means that we will prevail, but I ultimately think we will.
And right now we don't have very strong American leadership, so that's part of the problem I perceive.
No, it absolutely is. And so I think just one last point, Taiwan's a long way away. Frankly, I think a lot of Americans didn't even find it on the map. They're trying to deal with inflation and gas prices and getting their kids off to school safely, and I get that. But the world economy is interconnected. And if China does take Taiwan, they will control the sea lanes and trade routes into Japan, South Korea, Australia, Southeast Asia. They will essentially then have a chokehold on 50% of global GDP in trade. And that will be a huge first step for them towards the Communist Party's vision of global dominance, which they have laid out. And President Xi has told his military to be prepared to militarily take Taiwan by 2027. That is literally right around the corner.
Wow.
I don't know. Meanwhile, while they're making those preparations and trying to achieve military dominance, ours is going backwards. They are marching towards a 500-ship Navy. This year, the Biden administration will retire 24 ships and only build 9. The Chinese shipyards are outbuilding ours 5 to 1 at this rate. So, and we have a defense budget from Biden that, with inflation, also goes backwards and represents cuts. So we have got to turn things around this November, and we have certainly got to turn things around in November 2024 to, I think, have the political will, leadership, strategy, and vision to deal with the threat that is the CCP.
Yeah, they've got the Belt and Road Initiative, and we've got a president licking ice cream cones is what it comes down to, right? It's the elections are huge.
Again, I mean, things like the fact that, the Chinese have bought up the ports on either side of the Panama Canal. They own mountain ranges in South America now that they took through their debt diplomacy as collateral that are in line with our rocket launches so they could track what's going on in space. They're on track to put up a manned station on the moon in coordination with the Russians by the end of this decade, and they're on track to do it. So, again, I keep ringing that bell, and I'm happy to come on with you anytime to talk through these issues.
Yeah, it's not cheery news, but it's crucial news, and I really want to thank you for your time and your attention to this matter. Thank you so much for coming on Bold and Blunt, Congressman, and thank you for your service to America.
Hey, thank you, and I'll be darned if I'm gonna have my kids growing up in a country led by socialists or a world led by Chinese communists. So
ditto.
We'll keep fighting this fight.
Ditto. It's a bit alarming, right? But look, you gotta face the truth so you can fight effectively. And if anybody knows what's going on in China and who is willing to speak as openly about it as this congressman, then I think we as American citizens ought to pay attention and pay mind. And take a page of warning here. The best way right now, the best way to immediately fight off this growing China influence in America and rise in dominance around the world and simultaneous demise of America in the eyes of the world is to vote out Democrats. You got to vote them out across the page. Let's clean house, get rid of the leftists, get rid of the anti-American forces, and then build back America again. Build back America and shut down the communists that are rapidly seeping into America and around the world. Thank you for listening. I want to remind you, if you like Bold and Blunt, to subscribe to Bold and Blunt at edify.app or at Washington Times, or wherever podcasts are offered. And, quick note, my newest book, Lock Down: The Socialist Plan to Take Away Your Freedom, such as elevating countries like China and watering down exceptional countries like America, is available anywhere books are offered. Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, Amazon, of course, or go to CherylChumley.com and order it there. Thank you so much for supporting Bold and Blunt. Thank you for listening. Tune in next time, and in the meanwhile, stay blunt, stay bold.